Before we get started, my name's Raphael, and I created this channel to share science fiction stories, the kind that stick with you even after they end. Everything here is made up, but full of emotion, tough choices, and moments that make you think. So, I'll ask just one small favor. If this kind of story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button. I'm working hard to reach my first 0 subscribers, and your vote of confidence really means a lot. And if you've got a second, drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there on the other side. Now take a deep breath. The story's about to begin. They always hired me for my hands. That was the reputation. Quiet, efficient, lethal when the time came, and most importantly, disposable. Humans are cheap muscle in the galactic core, especially the ones who don't talk much. I was Kael. I was the silent shadow of Ambassador Vrixana, the last diplomatic hope of the Draconian Hegemony. Vrixana was built for this life. She stood almost 2 meters tall, covered in the deep obsidian scales that marked her lineage. She carried herself like a starship cruising through heavy gravity, all power and deliberate movement. Right now, she was pacing the observation deck of the Serpent's Tongue, our diplomatic cruiser, tearing apart the political landscape with the speed of a quantum processor. We were 3 hours out from the neutral zone station, the Crucible. This was it, the summit with the Kryll syndicate. If Vrix couldn't secure a lasting armistice, the hegemony was ready to launch the first wave of planetary sterilization strikes. Billions of lives hung on Vrix's ability to navigate the Kryll's toxic, ritualized form of negotiation. I was in my usual position, near the plasma shielding controls, polishing the thermal reactive casing of my kinetic rifle. It was a comfort to feel the weight of something reliable. Diplomacy, I had learned, was the art of making sure the right people were afraid of the wrong things. "Kael," Vrix said, stopping abruptly, her tail flicking a nervous rhythm against the deck plating. Her voice was low, a low growl that usually meant she was about to demand something impossible, like making a politician tell the truth. I looked up. "Ambassador, I need you to stop polishing that rifle." I set the weapon down carefully, the magnetic lock clicking. "Is there a threat assessment change?" "No, not yet. This is different." She turned fully, her golden, slitted eyes fixed on me. Draconians rarely look directly at their subordinates. It's too intimate, too demanding. The fact that she was doing it now sent a cold spike down my spine. "The Kryll structure," she began, running a claw along the holographic display of the summit chamber, "is built entirely on status and perceived stability. They respect the family unit. They respect established lineage. They use the absence of a mate as a point of leverage. It suggests instability, weakness, or a lack of serious commitment to the future." I waited. I knew where this was going, but I refused to help her get there. My job was to be the wall, not the architect of her political theater. "The Kryll delegation is led by High Elder Zyk. Zyk is a brute, but he is also intensely traditional. He will probe every perceived vulnerability I present. My single status is a vulnerability." She sighed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. "I need a spouse for the duration of the summit, a placeholder, a symbol of strength and permanence." I nodded, watching the reflection of the nebula shift in her scales. "I understand the requirement. Good, you will be my husband." I didn't flinch. I just processed the logistics. My security designation changes from personal guard to consort. My access privileges increase. My tactical position changes from flank to direct support. Will I be required to engage in the traditional Draconian consort ceremonies, or is the facade purely for the Kryll? Vrix blinked. Draconians are used to flowery speeches, hesitation, or panicked refusals. My immediate jump to logistics threw her off balance. "Purely for the Kryll," she confirmed, recovering quickly. "It is a temporary assignment, Kael. A matter of optics. You will stand beside me. You will project strength, and you will, under no circumstances, deviate from the script." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Kryll believe that humans are emotionally simple, easily manipulated, but fiercely loyal. Your silence, which I usually find unsettling, is perfect here. It suggests intense, unquestioning devotion. You are the strong, silent foundation upon which my political house is built." I stood straighter. "I accept the assignment, Ambassador Vrixana." She smiled then, a flash of predatory confidence. "Excellent, Consort Kael. Now go change out of those tactical fatigues. You need to look less like a killer and more like a man who owns the killer." Oh, they had it so wrong. Vrixana thought she was hiring a silent prop. She thought my reputation for being quiet meant I was compliant. She didn't understand the specific, terrifying brand of honesty that comes from being a human who has spent a decade navigating alien politics. When you're the smallest, weakest species in the room, you learn that lies are expensive. They cost time and credibility. The truth, delivered cleanly and without apology, is the fastest way to end a conflict, often by ending the opponent's ability to fight it. They hired my hands. They were about to get my mouth. The next hour was chaos. I was stripped of my practical gear and forced into the formal attire of a Draconian consort, a high-collared, deep crimson uniform woven with bioluminescent thread that felt less like clothing and more like a cage. It was designed to maximize the appearance of height and intimidation. I felt ridiculous. Vrix, meanwhile, was giving me the crash course. "You are Kael of the Terran line. You met me during the Gorthian skirmish. You saved my life. Our bond is fierce and private. You are utterly devoted to my success. You do not speak unless spoken to directly, or unless I give a specific non-verbal cue." "What is the cue?" I asked. "I will subtly touch the edge of my left shoulder plate," she demonstrated, running a claw over the sharp edge of her ceremonial armor. "That means I need a distraction, an affirmation, or a swift, brutal end to a conversational thread." "Understood. If I am required to speak, what is the approved subject matter?" Vrix looked genuinely confused. "Approved? Kael, you are a consort, not a diplomat. Speak about our shared history, our future plans, the strength of the hegemony, standard political fluff. And if the Kryll ask a direct tactical question regarding the ongoing conflict or the internal instability of the hegemony?" She waved a dismissive hand. "You deflect. You defer to me. You are my emotional support, not my strategic advisor." "Ambassador," I said, leaning closer, my voice low and steady. "I have never deflected a question in my life. Deflection is a lie wrapped in politeness. I will answer honestly, but strategically. That is the only way I can guarantee the Kryll will believe the facade." Vrixana stopped, her eyes narrowing. "Kael, I am giving you a direct order. If you undermine the delicate diplomatic structure with one of your blunt assessments, I will have you court-martialed and spaced." "Understood," I replied without blinking. "But I remind the ambassador that a court-martial is only possible if we survive this summit. If the facade fails because I sound like a politician, we both die." She stared at me for a long moment. She was looking for fear, for hesitation. She found none. What she found was the simple, practical calculation of a human who understood the gravity of the situation better than she did. She needed a shield, and a shield needs to be solid. "Fine," she hissed, accepting the terrifying compromise. "But if you speak, it must be definitive. It must serve my objective. Do you understand the objective?" "Peace," I stated, "or failing that, the absolute certainty that the Kryll bear the responsibility for the inevitable war." "Correct." Now let's go sell this lie. The Crucible was a monstrosity, a relic of the last great galactic war, a station built into the heart of a dead asteroid belt, designed to look imposing and unforgiving. The docking bay air was thick and cold, smelling of ozone and recycled life support. Stepping onto the Kryll-controlled platform felt like walking onto a battlefield where the weapons were invisible. Vrixana was magnificent. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a monarch, her crimson robes rustling faintly. I walked slightly behind and to her left, the traditional position of the protective partner. My presence was meant to be a silent declaration. She is protected. She is stable. The Kryll delegation met us at the ramp. They were bipedal, heavily armored creatures, all sharp angles and dull grey chitin. Their leader, High Elder Zyk, was an ancient thing, his armor etched with centuries of political victories. He was flanked by two advisors, both radiating smug superiority. Zyk's voice, filtered through his vocalizer, sounded like grinding stone. Ambassador Vrixana, we welcome the hegemony to the Crucible. We see you have brought company. Vrixana executed a flawless diplomatic bow, a slight lowering of her head that acknowledged Zyk's status without conceding parity. High Elder Zyk, Vrix purred, her voice smooth and dangerous. May the scales of justice balance this day. Allow me to introduce my consort, Kael of the Terran line. I stepped forward, making sure I maintained eye contact with Zyk. I didn't bow. Humans don't bow to the Kryll. It's a small, ingrained insult that they tolerate because they think we are too primitive to understand the nuance. Zyk ran his optical sensors over me, a slow, contemptuous sweep. A human. Fascinating. We were under the impression that the Draconian Hegemony reserved such positions for species of proven longevity and strategic value. The insult was clear. You chose something disposable and weak. Vrixana was ready with a rehearsed deflection, a line about the universality of love and the strength of the bond. But she didn't get the chance. I felt the subtle brush of her claw against her left shoulder plate. The cue. She needed me to end the conversational thread now, before Zyk could establish dominance. I spoke, my voice calm, flat, and loud enough to carry through the quiet docking bay. Longevity is a luxury afforded to those who do not face true existential threats, High Elder, I said, my gaze locked on Zyk's faceplate. Humans understand the necessity of immediate action and the finality of consequence. We do not waste time on extended lifespans, preferring to achieve our objectives quickly or die trying. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The Kryll advisors stiffened. Zyk's head tilted slightly, an unexpected sign of engagement. Vrixana looked like I had just slapped her across the face with a wet fish. She was expecting a vague affirmation of loyalty. She got a thesis on human evolutionary philosophy, delivered as a direct challenge to the Kryll's slow, procedural nature. I continued, pressing the advantage. The ambassador chose me because I am not weighed down by the centuries of political baggage that burden your negotiations. I am here to ensure that the hegemony's objectives are met, swiftly and without complication. Zyk considered this. The Kryll value straightforward power, even if they cloak it in bureaucracy. My response, while rude, was undeniably powerful. It implied that the Kryll's long lives made them slow, and therefore vulnerable. A bold statement, human, Zyk finally rumbled. But boldness is often mistaken for recklessness. Recklessness is the inability to calculate risk, I countered instantly. I have calculated the risk of speaking this truth to you, High Elder. It is minimal, compared to the risk of allowing this summit to devolve into the customary political posturing that has already cost both sides millions of lives. The ambassador requires results, not rhetoric. Vrixana moved then, placing a heavy, possessive hand on my arm. This was not the rehearsed gesture of affection. It was a silent warning. Shut up. But the damage, the good damage, was done. Zyk had been thrown off his carefully prepared opening insult. He had been forced to engage with a human on a philosophical level, and that engagement had come with an implied threat. We are ready to end this, one way or another. We shall proceed to the chamber, Zyk declared, shifting his weight. He didn't look at Vrixana. He looked at me, as if assessing a newly introduced predator. We have much to discuss regarding the borders. As we walked through the sterile corridors, Vrixana leaned close, her breath hot against my ear. "Kael, what in the void was that?" she hissed, her voice barely audible. "I answered the question honestly, Ambassador," I whispered back. "He questioned your choice by suggesting I lacked strategic value. I proved that my strategic value is derived precisely from my species' lack of patience and willingness to escalate. He now views me not as a prop, but as your attack dog. Your stability is affirmed, and his confidence is shaken. You risked a diplomatic incident." "I averted a diplomatic ambush," I corrected her. "The Kryll do not respect politeness, Vrixana. They respect clarity. You wanted a solid foundation. I just proved I am made of reinforced concrete." She didn't argue further. She simply tightened her grip on my arm and led me into the main summit chamber. The room was circular, built around a central holographic projection table. The air was thick with the scent of metallic polish and ancient fear. On the hegemony side, we had a small delegation of analysts and legal advisors. The Kryll side was packed, dozens of observers, all armored and silent. Vrixana took her place at the head of the table. I stood directly behind her, slightly offset, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I was the visible weight of her commitment. The first hour was predictable. Zyk droned on about historical claims, citing treaties written in languages long dead. Vrix countered with calculated precision, dissecting his arguments piece by piece. It was theater, designed to wear down the opposition before the real negotiations began. Then Zyk pivoted. He wasn't interested in the Gorthian sector anymore. He was interested in leverage. "Ambassador Vrixana," Zyk said, his voice dropping in volume, forcing Vrix to lean in. "We have received intelligence regarding certain internal stresses within the hegemony. Rumors of failed harvests on Sector 7 and a disturbing lack of commitment from the Zydonian allies. This was the attack. The Kryll were masters of information warfare. They knew that if Vrix denied the internal weakness, she would be lying, and they had the data to prove it. If she admitted it, she conceded weakness." Vrixana paused, her scales shifting color slightly, a sign of internal distress. She was calculating the political cost of deflection. I felt her hand brush the back of her shoulder plate again. The cue. She needed me to break the tension, to change the subject, to provide a distraction so she could reset. Instead of interrupting the flow, I waited precisely 3 seconds, allowing Zyk's statement to hang in the air, establishing the gravity of the implied threat. Then I spoke, addressing Zyk directly, but keeping my focus on the holographic table. "High Elder," I said, my voice resonating with an unnerving calm. "The rumors of failed harvests and Zydonian instability are accurate." The entire room froze. Vrixana's head snapped around, her eyes wide with betrayal and shock. The Kryll advisors began whispering excitedly. Zyk leaned back, a triumphant, awful silence filling the space. "Kael!" Vrix hissed, a barely restrained roar. I ignored her. I had the stage, and I had the truth. "The hegemony is experiencing resource strain," I continued, projecting absolute confidence. "The Zydonians are indeed questioning their alliance, primarily due to the protracted nature of this conflict. They view continued engagement as a drain on their own future expansion. Zyk smiled, a hideous clicking sound. Then your position here is weaker than we imagined, Ambassador. Why should we negotiate with a power that is already collapsing internally? This was the moment. The knife point. Vrixana was ready to launch into a furious denial, to try and regain control. But she couldn't. I had already conceded the weakness. I finally looked at Zyk, meeting his gaze with the cold, unyielding stare of a human who had seen the worst of the galaxy. You misunderstand the nature of our weakness, High Elder, I said. We did not come here to negotiate from a position of strength. We came here to negotiate from a position of certainty. I paused, letting the word sink in. The hegemony is strained. We are tired. Our allies are nervous. This means we have reached the point where the cost of continued diplomacy outweighs the cost of total war. If we fail here, if you use our internal stresses as leverage to demand territorial concessions, the hegemony will not engage in another year of talks. We will engage in a single, devastating campaign. I stepped slightly forward, my posture conveying the finality of the statement. You believe our instability makes us weak. You are wrong. Our instability makes us desperate. And, High Elder, I assure you, you have never seen what a desperate human will convince a desperate hegemony to do. We are tired of the slow bleed. We are ready for the quick, fatal incision. The chamber was silent again. But this time the tension was different. It wasn't the tension of political maneuvering. It was the tension of mutually assured destruction being laid bare on the table. I had just confirmed their intelligence, validated their concerns, and then used that confirmation to deliver the most unambiguous threat possible. It wasn't a lie. It was the absolute terrifying truth of the hegemony's current state. They had nothing left to lose by attacking, and everything to gain by ending the conflict immediately. Vrixana was breathing heavily, her chest plate rising and falling rapidly. She looked like she wanted to kill me, but the frozen horror on Zyk's face told me I had succeeded. Zyk cleared his throat, the clicking sound less triumphant, more uncertain. "Ambassador Vrixana," he said, ignoring me now, focusing back on the Draconian. "Perhaps we should move to the core territorial disputes immediately. The Gorthian sector is less important than the future stability of our respective realms." The game had changed. The Kryll had dropped the political theater and were now talking brass tacks. Vrixana finally found her voice, though it was strained. "I agree, High Elder. Let us discuss the future." She did not touch my shoulder. She did not look at me. But as she began the real negotiation, she shifted her chair slightly, moving me from her flank to directly behind her, solidifying my position as her ultimate, terrifying weapon. I had been hired to be silent. Instead, I had just introduced the Kryll to the concept of lethal honesty, and the summit, which was supposed to last 3 weeks, was now going to be decided in the next 3 days. End of part 1. The next 2 days were a blur of calculated aggression and surgical diplomacy. Vrixana was magnificent. With the political niceties stripped away, she navigated the territorial maps with the cold efficiency of a starship captain calculating jump vectors. The Kryll, forced out of their ritualized comfort zone, were clumsy and reactive. But High Elder Zyk was not a fool. He knew exactly where the hegemony's pressure point lay, and he waited until the final session to strike. The Nexus Point. It wasn't a resource hub or a major colony. It was a strategic choke point, a gravitational anomaly that controlled all faster-than-light traffic between the hegemony core and the Zidonian sector. If the Kryll controlled the Nexus, they could isolate the hegemony's unstable allies and choke off vital supply lines in any future conflict. "We demand a demilitarized buffer zone extending 3 light years past the Nexus Point," Zyk stated, his voice ringing with finality. "This is our minimum requirement for a lasting peace." Vrixana's internal monitors must have been screaming. That concession was impossible. It meant surrendering the hegemony's tactical future. She had prepared a counteroffer, a complicated multi-sector exchange designed to buy time, but Zyk preempted it. "Do not insult us with sector swaps, Ambassador," Zyk clicked. "We know the true value of the Nexus. Either we secure our flank, or we conclude that the hegemony intends to use it to launch future aggression." Vrixana leaned forward, her obsidian scales catching the harsh light of the chamber. She was trapped. If she refused, Zyk would walk, declaring the hegemony unwilling to compromise, thus shifting the blame for the inevitable war. If she accepted, she doomed the hegemony to future slow attrition. Her hand moved. It didn't brush her shoulder plate. It rested there, her claw digging slightly into the armor. It was a clear, unscripted plea for help. She needed the conversational equivalent of an orbital bombardment. A distraction so massive she could retreat, regroup, and offer the prepared, less damaging compromise. I looked at the nexus point projected on the table. It was a beautiful, deadly swirl of purple and blue gravitational forces. I had studied the sector maps for weeks as part of my security preparation. I knew the Nexus. I knew exactly what the hegemony had planned for the Nexus. I stepped forward, moving until I was standing right next to the projection, my shadow falling over the swirling anomaly. "High Elder Zyk," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. "The hegemony cannot cede the Nexus point." Vrixana inhaled sharply, a sound like tearing metal. The Kryll observers leaned in, sensing blood. Zyk fixed his gaze on me, his optical sensors glowing maliciously. The consort speaks again. Does the human truly believe his tactical assessment supersedes that of the Draconian High Command? "No," I replied instantly. "I believe my knowledge of the operational reality supersedes the political theater you are currently engaged in." I pointed a finger directly at the projected anomaly. "The Nexus point is strategically invaluable, yes, but you are attempting to acquire an asset that has already been rendered worthless to you." Zyk remained motionless. "Explain yourself, human, and choose your words carefully." "I am Kael. I do not choose my words carefully. I speak the truth," I said. "You believe the hegemony is internally stressed and slow to act. That was true until this summit began. When Ambassador Vrixana accepted this mission, the hegemony prepared for both outcomes, peace or immediate, total war. I tapped the Nexus Point projection. If peace fails, the hegemony's first strike is not against your border fleets. It is a sterilization deployment. You know this. We have discussed the potential for planetary eradication." Zyk nodded stiffly. "We are aware of the draconian capabilities." "You assume that strike would be aimed at a populated Kryll world?" I continued, my voice low. "It won't be. That would be an act of war, triggering a retaliatory exchange that would destroy both our civilizations. The hegemony is not suicidal." I paused, letting the fear of mutual destruction settle. "The hegemony is practical. If this summit failed, the first sterilization strike was scheduled to hit the Nexus Point itself, not a planet, the anomaly." A ripple of panicked movement went through the Kryll delegation. Even Vrixana looked utterly horrified. This was information above her diplomatic clearance. This was military-grade truth. "The Nexus Point, High Elder," I explained, maintaining eye contact, "is a gravitational singularity that dictates FTL travel. If a heavy-yield sterilization device, a singularity collapse generator, is detonated at the Nexus, the resulting gravitational distortion will not destroy ships. It will render the entire sector impassable for faster-than-light travel for the next 300 years. I spread my hands over the table. You would gain a demilitarized zone that is strategically worthless. You would inherit a 300-year dead zone, crippling your own future expansion plans far more effectively than any hegemony fleet ever could. And because the target is an uninhabited spatial anomaly, the strike is not technically an act of war against a sovereign Kryll territory. It is, by galactic statute, a proactive denial of infrastructure. We would not be starting the war. We would be ending the possibility of your victory before it began. The silence was the loudest sound I have ever heard. The Kryll advisors were frantic, whispering into their comms, clearly validating my assessment with their tactical analysis teams. They knew I wasn't lying. I couldn't be. The risk of exposing such a devastating tactical plan was too high, unless it was already a certainty. Zyk's armored posture seemed to shrink. He had spent 3 days trying to leverage a perceived political weakness, only to discover that the hegemony had already calculated the exact cost of losing, and had prepared a response that made victory impossible for him. "You speak of absolute denial," Zyk ground out, his voice shaking slightly. "I speak of certainty," I corrected him. "You wanted to know the depth of the hegemony's commitment to peace. It is this. We are willing to destroy a major strategic asset to ensure you cannot have it. We came here desperate, High Elder. Desperate people do not compromise their existence. They ensure yours is untenable." I stepped back, returning to my position behind Vrixana. My job was done. I had introduced the only variable that mattered, the absolute, non-negotiable cost of failure. Vrixana, recovering with astonishing speed, placed her hand firmly on the table. "High Elder Zyk," she said, her voice now steady and lethal. "My consort is blunt, but he is correct. We did not come here to haggle over future possibilities. We came here to define the present reality. The Nexus Point remains under hegemony control, with guaranteed verifiable inspection protocols to ensure no offensive buildup. We will, however, concede the entirety of Sector 14, which provides you with the resource access you require and creates a natural, stable border." Sector 14 was a valuable concession, one she had planned to hold back until the last day. But now, it wasn't a concession born of weakness. It was a generous gift offered after a successful demonstration of ultimate power. Zyk looked at the projection of Sector 14, then back at me, then finally at Vrixana. He understood. The hegemony had paid the political cost of appearing weak, only to use that weakness as justification for extreme measures. They were ready to burn the house down to keep the Kryll from living in it. "Sector 14, Zyk rumbled, after a long, agonizing pause. "And guaranteed, verifiable inspection of the Nexus Point infrastructure." "Agreed," Vrixana confirmed, without blinking. The summit was over. The peace treaty was drafted and signed within the hour. It was a fair treaty, brutal in its clarity, and entirely dependent on the mutual, terrifying understanding that both sides had just stared into the void of total war and flinched. We won, not because Vrixana was a better diplomat, but because I had, 3 times, replaced a political lie with a tactical truth. The trip back on the Serpent's Tongue was silent. I had been stripped of the ridiculous crimson consort uniform and was back in my black tactical fatigues, polishing my kinetic rifle in the observation deck. Vrixana was standing where she had been 3 days earlier, watching the stars rush past. She hadn't spoken a word to me since Zyk signed the treaty. I expected execution. I deserved it. I had violated every protocol, ignored every direct order, and revealed classified strategic deterrence plans. Finally, she turned. She didn't pace. She simply stood, a monument of obsidian scale and barely contained rage. "Kael," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You endangered the entire mission. You nearly caused a catastrophic diplomatic breakdown on 3 separate occasions. You revealed the Nexus Point contingency, intelligence that was supposed to be a strategic secret for the next decade." I kept polishing the rifle bolt. "Ambassador," The objective was peace, or the certainty of Kryll responsibility for war. We achieved peace. At what cost? She demanded. The Kryll now know the limits of our desperation. They know the price we place on the Nexus. They will work for decades to find a countermeasure to that singularity device. I looked up, meeting her gaze. They will, but they won't go to war next week. They will spend decades preparing for a countermeasure that they may never find, because they now believe that the hegemony is capable of calculating and executing absolute strategic denial. You bought the hegemony 30 years of peace, Vrixana, not 3 months of armistice. I set the rifle down. Amblection is weakness, Ambassador. If I had deflected Zyk's questions about the hegemony's instability, he would have known I was lying. If I had deflected his demand for the Nexus, he would have known you were bluffing. The only way to make the threat credible was to confirm their worst fears and then show them the consequence of acting on those fears. She walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. I could feel the heat radiating off her scales. You were hired as a silent prop, Kael, a symbol of devotion. You were supposed to be the wall, not the bomb. You hired me for my reputation, I reminded her. Quiet, efficient, lethal when the time came. I was all three. I was silent until you were backed into a corner. I was efficient in achieving the objective. And my honesty was lethal to the Kryll's negotiation strategy. She stared at me for a long moment, her golden eyes searching for any sign of regret or fear. She found none, just the simple, cold reality of a human who saw the political landscape as a problem to be solved with the fewest possible variables. She sighed, a sound of heavy resignation. The Hegemony Council will want your head, Kael. They will view your actions as insubordination of the highest order. I accept the consequence, I said. Vrixana turned away, looking back out at the stars. I wrote my report already. I confirmed that the intelligence regarding the Nexus Point was leaked to the Kryll by a rogue element within the Hegemony Fleet Command, which I have since neutralized. I raised an eyebrow slightly. A lie, Ambassador? A necessary lie, she snapped. I secured the peace. I will not allow your tactical brilliance to be undone by political cowardice. You saved billions of lives, Kael, but you are too dangerous to keep around. She turned back, her expression softening slightly, acknowledging the impossible debt. You are relieved of all duties, effective immediately. When we dock at the nearest independent station, you will be given a severance package that will make you a wealthy man for the rest of your short life. You will be provided with a new identity and transport to any sector you choose, provided it is outside the hegemony's immediate influence. The cost. I had secured the peace, but I had burned my career to ash. I was a ghost again, a man without a home, too blunt for diplomacy, and now too well known for security work. I understand, I said, picking up my rifle. Thank you, Ambassador. Don't thank me, Kael, she murmured. I did this for the hegemony, not for you. You are a weapon that cannot be controlled, and therefore must be retired. She watched me for a moment longer, a flicker of something almost like respect in her eyes. You know, Kael, when I chose you, I thought I was choosing a simple, loyal muscle. I thought your silence meant compliance. Ambassador, I said, shouldering my rifle for the last time. Humans are cheap, yes, but our silence is not born of compliance. It is born of observation. And when we finally decide to speak, it is because the cost of remaining silent has become greater than the cost of the truth. I turned and walked toward the airlock, leaving the last diplomatic hope of the Draconian Hegemony to navigate her new, fragile peace. They had hired my hands, they got my mouth, and the galaxy, for the first time in a long time, was quiet. Because one human had decided that the most lethal weapon in the universe wasn't plasma or kinetics. It was absolute, unvarnished truth.